flat spot interception foible that Peter did. Remember? Wow, did you already catch that? Ready? So it wasn't like God was like, oh, geez, when Peter, not once, right? Peter denied knowing Jesus 3 times. Was it on the second or third? We start dropping some F-bombs, right? He's like, I'm going to make sure you people know, right? So here Jesus had literally been his lifeline for 3 years. He had been with Jesus, saw all the miracles, heard all the teachings. And this same Peter, who you just met today, would 3 times, I don't know, Jesus, I've never seen a man, F-bomb, F-bomb. I don't know, the beep, 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 get out of my beep, beep. So he's cussing up a storm, trying to really make sure everyone knows that he didn't know. Right? So as was mentioned, God knew that Peter would deny his son 3 times. God knows your foibles. He knows your weaknesses. He knows you're not a saint. He knows the times when you deny Christ, either by your words or by your lifestyle. You out, right? You and your failures, you and your strengths. God knew all of that before you were born and orchestrated the events for you to be in a relationship with him and for him to use you, right? So how special are you? Some of us may be listening to me, have low self-esteem. Some other people that might be listening, particularly I think of my days as a single pastor, women who are just dating any old guy that would ask them out. Standards are so low, right? So some of us are maybe, just sleeping with men, doing stuff with men, just due to our low self-esteem, not understanding how special you are, that the eternal, triune, omnipotent God called you specifically, right? So God calls us. We should have good God self-esteem, knowing that, hey, we are special. I don't need to settle for any Tom, Dick, and Harry who asked out. Another application about how special you are, that God called you. And I was telling my boys this, and it's funny seeing Josiah's eyes get so big, and I've told him this 100 times before, and I'll tell you again, and this is theologically true, it's not my opinion. The fact that you're still sucking up the good Lord's oxygen, if you can hear me and you're still breathing, that means God still has a plan for you. Right? The very fact you were born on the date, right? My little narrow butt, nappy-headed, February 3rd, 1971, right? Trillions of years before I was born, fill in the blank for you. Before you were ever born, right? God orchestrated for you to be born. You're still alive today because God had this, and here it is. God has a specific set of things, an assignment for you to accomplish. And here's the part where Josiah's eyes got out big, even though I've told him this before. God has things he wants to do through your life that no one in the history of the planet, right, from the day God created it to the day you were born, no one would have been equipped to accomplish but you. So ready? You are so special that there's no one in the history of the planet could do the things that God has set for to accomplish in your life. Likewise, when you are in a casket right here and we all eating collard greens and black-eyed peas after your funeral, after you pass, no one else for the rest, as long as the earth will stand, will be able to accomplish the things that God wants to use you for. Right? So the Bible is rich with that, right? So God has equipped you, your strengths, your weaknesses, your experiences, everything that's been happening in your life, and the fact that you're still alive means he still has a plan. But the most powerful thing about God's calling us is that no one, think of the most godliest person, Albert Einstein, if you look up to Elon Musk, whoever you think is so awesome, that person can't accomplish the set of things, the people you'll be able to impact, the way you're going to alter the life history of those around you. God has a specific plan for you that no one before you, no one after you will be able to accomplish. Last thing of application, if you're someone listening to me today and you might currently or recently have had thoughts about suicide. Right? So again, one of those things, well, you're not supposed to talk about that. Everyone is rosies and puppies and pretty cats. If you're here listening to me and you have thoughts of suicide or planning suicide, first and foremost, we have to get help ASAP. But secondly, right, so we need professional help to get that. So there's help out there. But the point where I'm getting at is, boy, my thoughts of suicide should be changed when I realize that, wait, God has a specific plan for me. I can't get in the way of God's plan by taking my life. I can't take my life because the fact that I'm still living means God is still using me and there's still work to do. Once God is done with me, then he is going to take my life. I don't need to thwart God's plan by taking my life. So if you're listening to me today and you're recently been thinking of suicide or off and on you think of suicide, one, you got to get help. Two, I want you to know is that suicide says to God that, oh, you know what? I got my own plans. I'm done. I can't take fill in the blank anymore. And I'm going to just end my life and end it. Right? God will take your life when he's done with you. Until then, you're immortal. Right? When God's done with you, he's going to have you stop sucking up his good air. But until then, you're immortal. Suicide thwarts God's plans and wishes for you. And again, it's not this fatal sin that sometimes we've been taught, but so that's a whole nother sermon. But just know that if you're listening to me, you struggle with suicidal thoughts, one, you got to get help, but just know that suicide interrupts God's wishes for what he wants to do for you and why he orchestrated the events that led you to him. God sought you out and called you specifically. You need to respond in obedience by faith, by the way. So just kind of quickly, remember Peter initially in verse 5, like, Master, we've worked hard all night. I haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I'll let down the nets. We need to respond to God in obedience and by faith. Here's the second point. Second point is one of God's primary desires for you is to be a fisher of men. Verse 10b, remember he said, hey, don't be afraid, Peter, from now on, you will fish for men, or some translation says from now on, you will be a fisher of men. So one of God's primary desires for you is to be a fisher of men. So of course, God's first and foremost priority or desire for you is that you would just worship him and adore him. But right, I would say probably close second or right up there, maybe in God's mind, they're kind of equal. God wants us to be fishers of men. Here's a verse that comes to mind that speaks to that. Matthew 28, 19 and 20. Matthew 28, verse 19. Jesus speaking to his disciples and you and I who would follow after. Therefore go. In the original language in the New Testament is written in is, as you go about, as you go, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I commanded you. And surely I am with you always, even to the very end of the age. So again, the idea was as you go. Right? So Jesus' words, if you and I were alive back then and could hear him, he would say, hey, as you go, make disciples. So it isn't, well, okay, the special few of you that I'm going to call to be missionaries. A lot of people read this verse and think, oh yeah, this is the verse that encourages people to be missionaries. Everyone is a missionary. God says, as you're just going about your life, as you're at a grocery store, as you're at work, as you're at your kid's soccer game, as you go, make disciples. Making disciples, this next point, is simply sharing the good news, right? The good news is the gospel. Making disciples is not forcing it on people, right? So it's not, yeah, I have this Hindu neighbor and I, go up to him, hey, Hindu neighbor, your gods aren't the real gods, trust God, right? So it isn't forcing, beating up, guilting someone. It's simply sharing, right? Just sharing, hey, look, this is what God has done for me, right? So making disciples isn't forcing people, it isn't manipulating people. Something a lot of Christians are doing nowadays, trying to change culture to hopes that mass numbers of people will now all of a sudden come to Christ. The command to, as you go make disciples, is simply sharing, just simply sharing. Here's what God's done for me. It's not changing culture. It's not manipulating. It's not forcing people. It's not guilting people. It's just simply sharing. For some of us, we're like, well, hey, I don't know how to tell people about Christ. But then even it's just inviting them to church, right? So just inviting them where they will hear the good news. But it's simply sharing what you know, just sharing what, here's what I know. I don't know the Bible that well, but I know here's what God did for me. Here's how my life has changed. Sharing what God has done for you is powerful and more than enough. Here's an example of someone who, what I'm getting at here is oftentimes Satan tries to tell us that, well, you don't know the Bible well enough. You shouldn't share your faith with your golf buddy, or you shouldn't share your faith with that coworker where you guys have your standing lunch. Don't talk about Jesus. What if they ask you a question about the Bible you don't know? Well, you need to go to seminary or Bible college. Well, you can't debate. Well, what if they start debating you about something? Right? It's just simply telling God, here's what he did for me. Here's an excellent example of someone who didn't take a course, didn't go online and watch YouTube videos on how to share their faith. Jesus told this person and they knew, just what have I done for you? Here's Matthew 5, 18 through 20. Matthew 5, 18 through 20. This is the legion. The man was possessed by those demons that God had cast out. So this man who, his life was just marked by misery, being demon possessed, Christ has now healed him. And so here we land in verse 18 of Matthew 5. Matthew 5, 18. As Jesus was getting into the boat, The man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Here's this man like, Jesus, man, you have changed my life. Can I go with you? I don't know where you're going, but I want to go. Verse 19, Jesus did not let him, but said, go home to your own people. Here it is. Tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. Right, here's this guy, Lord, hey, is there room on that boat? I want to come with you. I just want to go with you anywhere you go. You changed my life. You got these demons out of me. Jesus tells him, no. Go back to your people. Tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. Right? It wasn't, hey, all right, you know what? When you go back, why don't you watch a couple YouTube videos on how to share your faith? It wasn't, hey, you might want to take a couple classes at a Bible college or seminary. It was simply just tell what the Lord has done for you. Sharing your faith is simply sharing what God has done for you, both in saving you or just how he's working in your life. Those just sharing of that helps people come to know the Lord. Third point, third observation is it's always darkest before the dawn. It's always darkest before the dawn. Here's Luke chapter 5, verse 5 through 7. Simon answered, Master, or Rabbi, your translation may have, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. Right? We've worked hard all night, haven't caught anything. My mortgage is coming up pretty soon and nothing, right? We have no fish to sell in the markets. We've caught nothing. We've been at this thing all night. But, because you say so, I will let down the nets. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that both boats began to sink. You can almost hear the despondency and the frustration in Peter's voice, right? It was dark, right? The discouragement that we've worked all night, we haven't caught anything. Can you relate to that today? I wonder if I'm talking to someone who just feels like they're at very rock bottom. Right? Are you listening to today and there's something that's going on in your life where you feel like, talk about dark, it's so dark. Your situation at work, or maybe you're trying to find a new job and it's just so dark every time. There's nothing out there. When I find something, by the time I put my application in, it's closed, or I'm getting beat out. Every time I try to interview for something, they tell me, I'm sorry, it's not going to work out. Are you at the darkest part when it comes to your job life? Maybe it's relationships. Maybe you're a single person's listening to me, like, I'm just trying so hard. I'm on these apps. My cousin introduced me to this one girl, and it just didn't work out. Right? Maybe some of us, we feel it's just so dark. Man. I just want to meet somebody. I want to get married. I'm sick of the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays, sitting at the table by myself while everyone else has someone. Do you feel like it's just so dark? Whatever the situation may be in financially, during every time I pay off one credit card, something breaks and I just rack it right back up to where it was. It's just so dark and despondent. Then you can relate to Peter, right? It was dark for Peter, right? I've tried all night and we haven't caught anything. Peter was at his lowest before God arrived big time. And as you know, which is the next point, how God shows up and overwhelms, right? So if you're listening to me today, you may be in a dark spot. You may be whatever it is. Maybe it's something I didn't mention, relationship-wise, health-wise, financially, whatever it may be. Just know that, hey, yeah, it's dark now. Peter was in a dark night of, look, I got bills to pay. I've caught nothing. I got a wife. We know Peter had a wife. I have kids I got to take care of. I'm in a dark spot because we haven't caught anything. Point 3, it's always darkest before the dawn, leads to our fourth and final point, is that God always overwhelms you with his goodness. God always overwhelms you with the goodness. His overwhelming goodness typically shows up when it's the darkest, right? Right when you really I can't take it anymore, is when God shows up. And when he does shows up, he shows up in an overwhelming way. Luke 5, 6, and 7. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. There's God and his nature, overwhelming, right? We go from not catching anything, I'm discouraged, I'm despondent, to so many fish that the nets are beginning to break. They signaled their partners in the other boat to come help them. They came, filled both boats, so that both boats began to sink. The amount of fish was so heavy. There's God in his overwhelming nature, right? When God shows up, he shows up in an overwhelming way. Another example that comes to my mind, right? So in this example, right, Jesus shows up, and this was a real thing that happened. It isn't like a metaphor for something. God showed up in an overwhelming way, breaking nets, making two boats sink. Think of a New Testament example, that passage that may or may not be familiar to a lot of us, where God shows up in a big way. The passage is 2 Kings 7, but just a little background. 2 Kings 7. In a moment, very quickly, we close. We're going to meet these four lepers. So in Old Testament, even in Jesus' day in the New Testament, but definitely in the Old Testament, if you were a leper, and it's a broad term for various skin conditions, you were just looked down upon, you were disdained, you lived a lonely life, right? So lepers pretty much had to stay in leper colonies with one another. You weren't part of society. The law was misunderstood. You wouldn't have gotten a hug, So as much as I appreciate a good hug, imagine going through life where if it's not just a fellow leper in your colony, but if you're not close to one of these colonies, you're living a pretty isolated life, right? People are looking at you like you did something wrong, even though it's a skin condition that you may have inherited or caught. So lepers were, kind of looked down upon, marginalized. You're about to meet these four lepers, and kind of, if we get in a time machine and go back in time, we're in the city of Samaria, which is in the northern, for people from Bible study, right? So Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom that bore the name Israel. Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom, which was known as Judah, had its headquarters in Jerusalem. But 2 Kings 7 drops us off when we open up the time machine in the city of Samaria. The city of Samaria, including these four lepers, were under siege, meaning an invading army, the Syrians, the people group, the Armenians, your verse may say, the Armenians, or known as the Syrians. In warfare back in that time, and happened today with Israel, with Gaza, so what would do is an invading army would circle a city, cut off the food and water supply, and just kind of wait. So they would just kind of wait for all, once everybody in the city kind of, ate up what little bit of what food was in the city, cut off the water, or they would limit it or what best they could. So siege warfare is when an invading army would surround a city, cutting off all the food and water, waiting for the men and the soldiers to get weak from not having food. Then they would come in to attack months later. So this is what's going on. So these four lepers are in the city of Samaria, which is under siege. And I think when we drop off, so just know that's what's happening. So it's siege, there's no food, there's no water, whatever water they were drinking was polluted from dead bodies and stuff. So now that's the 2 Kings 7:8. 2 Kings 7:8. The men who had leprosy, these four cats, I'm sorry, I should back up. This is the other thing. So what just happened right before verse 8 is, so remember they're in the city that's cut off from food and water. Samaria is the name of the city. So one of them gets the idea, you know what, this stinks. We're just sitting here, we're this close to dying. We clearly can tell we're not, look at us. We're just skin and bones. So one of them gets the idea, look, we can either just stay here in Samaria under siege and we're going to die here in the city, or, geez, at this point, since we know we don't have much time left, let's just go give ourselves up to the Syrians. Maybe they'll have mercy on us. If they put a bullet in our head, it's better than this life we have now. But who knows? Maybe the Syrians will have mercy on us. At least we can eat something and just be slaves to the Syrians. Let's go. Let's try to figure it out, right? So one of the lepers say, hey, let's go give ourselves up. Hopefully the Syrians will have mercy on us. They'll feed us. If they kill us, who cares, right? So that just happened, right? So that person, one of the four, had this bright idea. So now here we go. So these four men are like, leaving the city, barely able to walk because of starvation. They're headed out to the camp where the Syrian army is. And now verse 8, 2 Kings 7:8, the men who had leprosy reached the edge of the camp, entered one of the tents, and ate and drank. Then they took silver, gold, and clothes and went off and hid them. They returned and entered another tent and took some things from it and hid them also. And so what I should have mentioned, the other big thing is that a miracle happened here earlier in 2 Samuel 7. God had made it sound like this invading army was coming. So all the Syrians at twilight all just ran and left. Right? So the Syrian army fought. They were under invasion. They all flee, left their food in the oven that was being cooked, left everything. So that was this miracle that God did. So the army had fled. These four men, speaking of God showing up in an overwhelming way, these men go from starving to death with nothing to going, thinking the Syrians were still there, get to the edge of the camp and realize that everything is gone. So the verse here and the next verse is they're just going from tent to tent, just grubbing, right? So imagine you go from famine to nothing, and just in a matter of minutes, you go out to this camp and see that no one is there. There's food everywhere. So they're just going from tent to tent, just eating. God just shows up in a big, overwhelming way. One of the men would eventually say, hey, we need to go back and tell everyone that the invaders are gone and here's food everywhere. But that's the point. So it's just like God to show up in an overwhelming way. Right? These guys go from nothing, dark. They're realizing we're about to die. We got to do something. Let's just throw a Hail Mary, turn ourselves into the Syrians. It was dark for them. Then God shows up in this overwhelming way by them getting, coming up to the camp where the Syrians were and now seeing just food and stuff everywhere. They're going from tent to tent, just eating away. It's just how God shows up. But you simply have to be patient. And as Peter did, believe and obey. So quick review, God sought you out specifically and called you specifically. Question is, what are you doing? Do you feel like you're doing what God has called you to do? Certainly I and others can assist with that, but just know that you're utterly special, that God called you out. He orchestrated the events of you coming to know him. Next, one of God's primary desires for you is to be a fisher of men. This wasn't just Peter who's to be a fisher of men. Matthew 28, 19, and 20 says all of us should be just sharing our faith. How well and how often are you sharing your faith? Not ramming it down a person's throat, right? So I'm an atheist. It's not, do I need to turn from your ways, you atheistic dog? But just sharing, right? Are you sharing? Are you, geez, I don't even feel comfortable talking about that. Are you at least inviting me to come join you for church? Right? So we all need to be fishers of men. Third, it's always darkest before the dawn. Could be talking to someone where you're like, hey, you don't know what's going on in my life, Dorian, I haven't shared yet, but it is dark. Just know that, yes, it's dark. And I don't know why God in his infinite wisdom allows us, and some reasons, to grow our faith and other things. But if it's dark for you, that's okay, because point 4, God always overwhelms you with his goodness. It was dark for Peter, right? We haven't caught anything, but God shows up in an overwhelming way. When God does show up, it's just being patient and faithful until he does. Being patient and faithful, trusting in him until he does. But when God does show up, as we saw in verse 6 and 7, God always overwhelms us with his goodness, right? The nets were breaking, the boats are starting to sink. Here they are with buckets trying to get the water out as they try to get back to shore. God will show up in your life in an overwhelming way. If I could be of an assistance with the message, let me know. There's something going on in your life utterly unrelated to the message, let me know as well.